in this prayer, we have a sense of understanding how we are to pray. I call it a model. Most of the time when we ask about how do we pray, we think of what the disciples said to Jesus, right? Lord, teach us how to pray. And what prayer do we use as that guideline? The Lord's Prayer. You can hear the children. They may not seem to be attending to much, but do you hear their voices loud and clear in that prayer? They understand that that's just a part of the way that we communicate. But in this time where Jesus was anticipating, understood, kind of knew what was going on, his prayer becomes a model for us as to how to communicate with God. And so I thought that's what we should focus on. What is it in that prayer? What is it that Jesus says that can help us when we talk with God? So the first thing in chapter 17, and it's the whole chapter of 17 is this prayer recorded, we hear how Jesus acknowledges God as Lord, sovereign, that knows all. Did you catch that? Gracious, righteous Father, oh great God, my God. He uses the language that lifts up the fact that God is beyond human, that he is greater and he's all-knowing. And so the first thing that we need to think about in prayer is, why do we come to pray? Who are we talking to? It's not like me talking to Bruce and giving them a hug. It's that we are talking to the Holy of Holies. And when we have that conversation, we need to acknowledge that that is who God is. And when we do that, it sets our heart in the right place. The second thing we see in that prayer is that Jesus doesn't have a bunch of prescripted words. It isn't like I say this and I say this and I say that. Now, I am not faulting or dishing or making fun of written prayers that we pray. There are times in our life where we are just speechless. Is that not right? We don't know what to say. And written prayers, the prayers of the Psalms, which is what they all were just prayers of communication to God, or different prayers that we do together, like the Lord's Prayer, have great meaning to help us through those struggles, right? But most of the communication that you see from Jesus, and specifically in this prayer, is a conversation. Jesus is just talking. In fact, he's talking and he's repeating himself. Did you notice that? When I was reading it and reading it aloud again, I stumbled because I thought, well, I've already said that. Did you kind of think like Pastor skipped a part or she reread a part? Well, Jesus did that. In this prayer, he is praying his heart's thoughts, and they happen to be consistently the same thought. What is his thought? What is his prayer? His concern was for those he was leaving behind. You see, if you listen to the prayer that Jesus had, he knew who God was. He knew that God was sovereign, and it says in that prayer that you knew me from the beginning of creation. You knew that I would be coming back to you. You knew the plan that you had for me. And he even says, and I'm no longer of this world. Jesus knows the pathway that's going to happen in the next 24 hours, and it is going to be horrendous. And we talk about that during the Holy Week. But even though that was his concern, or that was going to happen, he was already released from this world. He no longer cared. He was ready to move on. Yet he wanted God to care for those whom God had entrusted him to care for. Have you ever been with a loved one and they know that that time is coming and they have the faculties, that you hear them pray for you, that their heart is concerned for you? As a pastor, I've seen that concern. Sometimes it's spoken and sometimes it's unspoken. Waiting for that time for God to put everything in order so they can move on. Waiting for the peace or the reconciliation or waiting for the child that lives long distance to finally get there. On Jesus' heart, in his prayer, were those that he was leaving. Now, he was concerned about their safety, and it reminds me of how we pray for the soldiers, right? Did you hear that similarity about that prayer? About protecting them and keeping them safe and giving them their wisdom. But he says, not only am I praying for them, I'm praying for those whom they will become a light. Because that is how you are going to be revealed, Lord. It's through what I did and how it affects the group and how they will live and affect the group. So, Lord, I pray for them. And his word was consistent. I pray for unity of heart to be one. Now, a lot of times we talk about peace, but we all want to live it our way. And peace is not doing it our way, is it? It just divides and separates and does those tearing. Jesus' prayer was, I got all these crazy people. Now, he didn't say crazy, but think about the characters. He's got the strong-willed, ADHD, headlong Peter, right? Who just goes before he thinks and says what he wants. He's got that sweet little naive John, who just waits at bated breath for whatever God says. And then he's got Andrew, Peter's brother, who's in constant argument with him, and James, John's brother, and you got it, right? They all were different, and none of them liked Matthew, because heaven knows his former occupation was tax collector. Do you understand why Jesus was concerned? He said, at least when I was here, I could keep them all together, except the one that you had already destined. But I'm going, Lord, keep them together. Keep them focused on you and not on their own areas. He prays for